Welcome to the Time for Littles podcast. I'm Bruce C.E. Fleming, Executive Director of the Eden Schoolhouse Network. Our website is edenschoolhouse.com. And our guest on this episode is Dr. Katie Bonawitz. Katie, can you say hello and give us a brief description of what you've been up to these days?
Yes, thank you so much, Bruce, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking about the littles and to be talking about micro schools. I'll give a brief bio so people understand where I'm coming from. I've been in the field of education for 31 years, and it is my work has largely been related to kids with disabilities. So I started as a special education teacher, and then I moved into higher education to prepare teacher educators. And I've been in higher ed now for 19 years. And that work has been related to preparing elementary education teachers, special education teachers. And now in my associate dean role for the past 3 years, I've been working with all of our education programs at Bethel University. So we are excited to be launching a brand new program for non-traditional elementary education teachers, which launches in fall of 26. And we're always trying to be innovative on how do we prepare teachers for our changing world. And as we think about Christian classrooms, we still want to make sure that those Christian classrooms have amazing teachers in them. And those teachers, when they come to Bethel, I can confidently say they are prepared so well. And we often focus on the whole child, not only for reading, not only for math, not only for social skills, but we really want to make sure we're looking at the whole child and how do we prepare that child well. That includes our kids with disabilities, our kids who have different unique needs. And we always want to make sure that regardless of the title a teacher has, they will have kids with different needs in their classrooms. And we sometimes say neurotypical and neurodivergent students. So how do those neurodivergent children learn best? And we are preparing our teachers. And that's largely what my career has been, is to prepare any teacher, even including university professors, helping them understand their entire student population. And because we live on this earth and we know that God has created every individual, He doesn't create individuals in a vacuum. They are not created the same. And so how do we ensure those educators understand who those children are? And when there are differences, which we celebrate because God has created them, how do we help that individual learn the best that they can? And not everyone's going to be a doctor, a teacher, an attorney. We need plumbers, we need mechanics, we need carpenters. So how do we help that child be the best they can be in that learning environment? And micro schools is one more of those learning environments.
Now, I know that you're definitely involved with Lithuania, and that'll come up a little bit more. But you had a story I think you could tell us about how what you're doing has an impact around the world, especially there in Lithuania.
My husband and I have been blessed to have multiple opportunities overseas, and the two that had the biggest impact on our lives were in Ukraine and Lithuania. And our time in Lithuania was during a significant historical moment of inclusion starting. So inclusion for kids with disabilities, where September of 24, children with disabilities for the first time were invited into the public schools. And the law allowed that to happen. And during that time, I was learning about this and then was invited to participate in the launching of inclusion. And my husband and I met a young man with Down syndrome. At the time, he was 14, and he was speaking fluently with us. And I thought, I had no idea kids with disabilities would be, or kids with Down syndrome in particular, would be fluent in another language, which I was ashamed that I thought that. And then I realized, well, in America, we don't really prepare people to learn other languages. And so my husband said, if God brings us back to Lithuania, I wonder if this young man could be your translator. Because we had just been hearing many negative comments about they shouldn't be allowed in school, and how dare they put somebody with a disability in my daughter's kindergarten classroom. And then we met this young man,
Yes.
and 14 months later, God brought us back to Lithuania, and this young man was my translator in front of 1,000 people,
Oh,
only for 10 minutes. But it was this message of not to put him on a pedestal because he has a disability, but to say, I don't have a voice with you today if he isn't beside me. He is my voice for
yeah,
these 10 minutes.
yeah.
And now his mother has always given us permission to talk about him, but now he will be translating children's Christian books
Oh,
for us so that these books specifically for kids with autism, which I have some copies for your micro schools, Bruce, they're written by Dr. Danielle Nordell. And she has agreed to allow this young man to translate these books into Lithuanian so that we have something to start with right away. So my husband and I will be moving to Lithuania summer of 26 to start missions work that we never dreamed we would be doing. But God has made it crystal clear for us that our work is not done in Lithuania. And so we'll have the
well,
opportunity to help people see
yeah.
these individuals with disabilities.
There's so many loose ends here. Let me tie one up here. So you're saying this book in Lithuania could be helpful here in the United States. And I think I know who that author was. And she started out with a ministry in Cameroon, French-speaking Africa. So
That's
where
right.
where
Yeah.
Joy and I used to work. So, oh, this is great. I did not know she had that available to you. Let's pop into our question time. Then we'll get more details as it comes out. So what we'd like to ask is, did you come to know Jesus in your heart as a little, or did that happen later on?
I really came to know Jesus in my heart, as in I say I was born again when I was about 30 years old. I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a home that valued Jesus, but because of the church I grew up in, it was not there was so much I was missing. And so then as an adult, I continued to search for who is Jesus and what does it actually mean to have a personal relationship with him. And my life changed after that. And so even though I was in my late 20s, early 30s, when I was searching so desperately for this, I had a strong foundation in the family I grew up in.
Mhm.
Uh, but as an adult, coming to know Christ and working in the public schools at that time, it became a critical part of my everyday that I might be in a public school. I was in a very large Minnesota high school. Um, but I can put Jesus right in every space because he's with me. And and so that was just such a broad new scope I had never had before, even though I would have called myself a Christian.
Mm.
And so that became, the students, because I worked in special education, I was working with some very, very difficult mental health issues. And I was a leader at that time. And so the most difficult issues would end up in my office. And I just started every one of those conversations privately with prayer, and would have enough things in my office that would cause some kids to say, well, what does that mean? And can you tell me about that, like a Bible verse, or why did I have a Bible, things like that. And so, but now as I communicate with great nieces and nephews who are littles, I just the other day, I had the opportunity, and they're just sponges, and they just take in all of that information. And I didn't get that as a little girl. I didn't get to listen to praise and worship songs as a little girl. I didn't get to know how you pray as a little girl. And I think about a micro school environment, especially a Christian micro school environment, where those children are little sponges. And not only are they growing to who God is creating them to be, but they are growing in his word and in an environment that just naturally gives that to them, not only on a Sunday morning for 30 minutes, but through an entire school day. So I'm excited to hear about how these classrooms are actually set up. And if I have the opportunity to step into one, I welcome that, because I think there's so much that could be happening in these classrooms.
I was a bus driver when I was in grad school, and they transferred me. They said, "Oh no, you get to do this route over here, and you're going to have to secure things." I said, "What? What?" And they said, "We have some young little kids that are in wheelchairs, you know, with all kinds of apparatus attachments and stuff." And they were nonverbal. The kids were probably kindergarten, first grade. And I had this little van I was driving, and I was happy. I was happy in the Lord. So I just decided to sing, "Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus." And after about the third day, I could hear them singing more or less as much as they could, singing along with me. You know, I just thought, okay, great. We are praising, making a joyful noise to the Lord. We had a wonderful time together.
That's right.
We had a wonderful time
That's
together.
wonderful.
Yeah. So you had an interest, sounds like early on, in special ed. Can you tell us more about that and what's that mean and things, what's the word
Mhm.
spectrum mean? And, you know, there was, when I was being trained, there were things like trainable and educable and words like that, but that's not what we use these days. Is it possible for
Mhm.
Christian schools to have kids, at least in the upper end of the spectrum, in classrooms? How does all that work?
Yeah. So many people come into into the special education field because they've had a personal experience
Yeah.
with a family member or someone close to them who has a disability. And that was not the case for me. I was really introduced to it when I was a student, an elementary education student, and was given this opportunity to apply for a brand new program, which was in the mid 90s, and inclusion was just starting. So kids with disabilities in American public schools could start going to school in 1975 with the passage of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It had a different name back then, but that's what we know it to be today. In the mid 90s, there was a push to start them in a general education classroom and then pull out as needed and push in as often as we could. And so the law doesn't require that inclusion is happening, but we always have to start there and consider all of those opportunities. So for me personally, that became this amazing opportunity to really understand who are these students who will be in my classroom, which I thought would be an elementary ed classroom, and God had different plans. It's been special ed all along, but that allowed me to really see how the two work well together. And so as we think about a micro classroom that may or may not have somebody educated in special education, mild to moderate disabilities are such that they can absolutely thrive
Mm.
in an inclusive classroom, which is what I would call a micro classroom, that just the ground floor
Yeah.
is inclusive. And then you determine whether or not somebody can be educated in that environment. And so even though only one of our disability categories has the word spectrum in it, every disability has a spectrum of sorts because it is mild all the way to severe, profound. Learning disabilities are largely mild. If somebody's really struggling in reading, we may say it is more of a moderate disability, but ultimately, kids with learning disabilities are in their general ed classrooms. Students with emotional and behavioral disorders, mild to moderate, is very appropriate to be with other kids because it may be depression, it may be a mild OCD, it may be a mild mental health disorder. That can be, it's really quite wonderful when our students with mild to moderate needs can be learning right alongside their peers, because they're learning from their peers, and that's good because those peers are modeling just what learning is all about.
So in a
In the
family
public
in families that have multiple kids, you know, they used to have 8 kids, whatever, you would see what the older kids are doing along the line. Or what we want to do in
exact,
the Eden Family Schoolhouse is to have 3 grades in this room and then 3 grades above it in that room. And then you're with that teacher for 3 years and you hear
yeah,
a lot of the lessons over.
yeah.
That's good for them.
Yeah, and that natural environment is such a positive place to learn. And, it's what I love about if I think about Little House on the Prairie and that one room schoolhouse is the kids are learning from one another. And we don't have to put labels on everything. We do in America because it means somebody will get additional services. But we don't need to have labels. We can simply look at how does this child learn best,
Yeah,
and when I'm in a room with kids with multiple grades, some are going to be 2 years ahead and some are going to be right in line and some are going to be a little bit behind. That's just the natural audience that you will have. It's the natural population.
right,
And so I think of, autism is the one that has spectrum in its label, autism spectrum disorders. Mild to moderate autism means that I need to understand how this kid's brain works.
right.
And if I can understand that, well, they can be successful in this classroom. And then the other one, the one that's more difficult would be kids with intellectual disabilities, because that IQ is going to be lower. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but at a certain age it will be more difficult. But again, that natural environment of learning is where we want all kids to start. And if a family is willing to try, to see if it works, if the teacher is willing to see how that might work. But I would say it's not a no until you know that that child's needs can't be met. More medically fragile, that's probably a no. But again, that family may have a 24-hour PCA, personal care attendant, and then all of a sudden it opens up the door to be in this classroom, because we want that child to just simply interact and learn those social skills, and to have friends, and to be learning whatever, however they can be learning. But again, those would be individual conversations. But mild to moderate needs, those kids, I will even say, they could flourish in that environment. That teacher just, needs to understand their needs. And as long as and I have never been a proponent of a one-on-one support for any kid, for any child, unless that person is medically fragile. So I believe, given the environment, it can be very successful. And I would say if I were 25 years old, I'd be signing up to be that teacher.
Yeah, well, we don't mind if you're 28 or 29. That's okay too. Can you pull out a story, a fun story from Ukraine or from Lithuania for us? How the Lord's worked through you and maybe Luke too, or tell us about that.
Yeah. Uh, it so often relates to kids having opportunities. And we met a young man with autism, many kids with autism when we were in Ukraine, but in particular, this one boy came. We were at a camp, a Christian camp, and we were there during Family Week, which meant these were families who had kids with disabilities, and the parents would have opportunities to learn from me. They'd also have some respite time, and then the kids are just doing camp stuff. And I observed this young boy that was not engaging with the others and would sometimes have meltdowns. And it was his dad that actually had to go with him all around the camp because he wasn't able to be successful on his own. And so, with my background, I observed that he is probably on the autism spectrum based on what I was seeing. And so I asked if I could meet with dad and mom. And so I met with them and listened. We had a translator, and I was able to put in a request to America, an Amazon wish list. I had never done this before. And I just requested a bunch of items that some friends would bring over when they were coming. We happened to be able to be there for 3 months. This suitcase arrives with all the things I had asked for, things like a weighted vest, some sensory items, a visual clock to help with watching the time so you know how long you can be doing a task. And then I proceeded to tell, at this point, it was only with the father, and I had no translator. So I'm literally using Google Translate to teach him how to use these items with his son. And we were also using the items for schools and many other places. And at the end, I said, I pray, God, will be able to use these in some small way with your son. And in his Google Translate, he goes, well, I don't. I pray God uses these in mighty ways for my son. And I was like, of course that is what we would want to
Yeah,
say.
sure.
And a few days later, the dad sent a video of his son eating soup to somebody at the camp, and then they proceeded to share it with me. And I said, well, this is nice, but can you expand on this? And they said, Katie, because he was wearing his weighted vest, he was sitting on a bumpy seat, and they kind of had all the things at once, which was really precious. They said, Katie, I want to say he was about nine years old. He has never been able to eat soup alone on his own, independently.
Yeah,
But that's what he needed. The family needed somebody to help them understand that their son, he was not able to self-regulate. And
right.
those few items,
Yeah,
and those items were available in Ukraine, they just would not have even known to look for them because their son wasn't allowed to go to school. And so those few items made all the difference. And now I don't know, because they don't speak English and I don't speak Ukrainian, we've lost touch now. I don't know where their son is today, but I know for a fact he was a smart young boy. But he could not regulate enough to even do any schoolwork, to pause long enough to read, to pause long enough to do math. And now, he learned what it felt like to be regulated. And so now he should be able to say, I need to wear that weighted vest for a little bit, because he knew how much it calmed him.
yeah,
And so that was just extraordinary to see how something so small could make such a mighty difference, as the
yeah.
father would say.
Mhm.
And that was just for sure a favorite story, a highlight from that time.
Yeah. Wow. So have you heard of these micro schools popping up? Have you come across any of these in your studies?
I have not until you taught me about
Huh.
it.
And not until I started looking around. So when we came back from Africa, our daughter was going to be in first grade, and what was available? Well, there was a private Christian school, K through 8, about 50, 60 kids. They met in a Catholic church wing that they weren't using the educational wing anymore. And so these parents got together in 1956 and they founded this little private Christian school. And so all those years later, our daughter went into first grade and went up through fifth and sixth. And I saw, where's she going to go for grade 9? And we prayed about it and thought about it. And actually, we felt that the Lord was going to have us start a Christian high school for her. And the only model I had back in those days was a public school. So we designed it like a public school. And now it has Southwest Christian High School. They have 580 students and they've got 55 staff and they've got 29 acres and it looks like a public school. We didn't do that. We built a basic concept into it. And they came up with a slogan. They said, you know what this is? This is a discipleship Christian high school. So now we're interested in starting these elementary schools, and the model could be charter schools or public schools or private schools or home schools, but there's this whole new wave of micro schools. And one teacher has a couple of grades, and another teacher has another couple of grades. Maybe there's a third teacher to fill in the gaps and help out and administer. And we just got thinking, why don't we put them in the Sunday school rooms in wonderful churches? And we have a Christian micro school where instead of having a winter program where they sing about snowballs, we can have a Christmas program where we talk about baby Jesus. And just part of the experience of those kids is they'll learn some of those wonderful songs, the background that you got that served you later on when you got older and the Lord was calling you. So that's the concept of a Christian micro school. And our prayer is that we can start small and we can start one micro school here and another micro school there, and eventually maybe 5 micro schools in an area, and then approach other metro areas and just start from there. it's a big wave that's spreading out right now. I think it's a time to go surfing. Let's surf that wave, get on top of it,
That's
egg
right.
10, all those surfing words. And is it possible that a Christian church in Lithuania could start a micro school? You think they could pull off something like that?
Well, if anyone likes to dream about those things, I do. So I think, our experience with the evangelical churches in Lithuania is they're quite small and they're often rented spaces.
Hmm.
And so the rental space, if they're only renting it on Sundays, for example,
Right.
and Wednesday evenings,
Yeah.
then that would prove to be a challenge. There are hundreds of Catholic churches in Lithuania, and I don't know. I know some of those Catholic churches are quite progressive and may be really interested in this.
Yeah.
As far as the schools in Lithuania, there are private schools, there are private Christian schools, there are public schools, and similar to Finland, I've also spent time in Finland. The private schools actually don't cost any money. It's basically alerting families that you're choosing to go to a school that is Christian in nature. I worked very closely with an organization that was Seventh-day Adventist, and they had an amazing school, and really enjoyed seeing what they were doing there. And their teachers weren't required to be Seventh-day Adventists, but their teachers had to feel comfortable with it, that I am in this school that is going to hold Christian services, and I will need to be engaged in that. And then the children had a special religious hour that, somebody who truly was Seventh-day Adventist would have been teaching that. So I don't know yet in Lithuania if private schools are free or if people actually have to pay for them.
So when you say free, you mean the government would pay for the teachers?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So there's
Yeah.
some states
And
here.
then the families would not have to pay
Yeah,
for their children to go there.
yeah. So there are some states where the tuition does follow the student. In the United States,
Okay.
we've got that. Um, Arizona, Texas, other Florida, maybe. So that's happening. And there's some states where that'll never happen. So
Mhm.
I wish it would, but we're being doubly taxed as we have to pay for our own. That K through 8 school had a lot of old cars in the parking lot. And one of the parents said to me, where our new cars are. It's in the tuition we're paying for our kids to get this good education. And so there's sacrifice to be made. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a favorite verse or two that you like when it comes to education, Christian education?
Well, the one that my husband and I are using with our missions work, and always been a favorite, is Matthew 25:40. And in particular, I like the message version because I think it really makes a statement on what we're seeing, what I am seeing in our schools and countries today, especially in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, is that whatever Jesus did for the least of these, those who were overlooked and ignored, he did for me.
Uh,
And it is because they have been overlooked, they have been ignored, and people don't know what to do with these individuals with disabilities. And it's a post-Soviet country. But I will say that's why I was so surprised when this one young mother who was about 30 and would not have grown up in a Soviet era was so adamant that kids with disabilities will not be around her daughter. And we know from our experiences in America that our kids who were starting school in the mid 90s have only ever known that I have classmates who are different than I am. And at Bethel, we're seeing the success of that because we have a program called BUILD, and it's for students with intellectual disabilities and who come to Bethel. They have a university experience. They don't get a degree, but they get a certificate of completion. But they're experiencing what everyone their age is experience, what many people their age are experiencing in their early 20s. They're
Yeah.
experiencing college, and they're taking classes with, Psych 101 and astronomy and some of their own classes like independent living, and they have their own Bible class so that they can dig a little deeper at their own level. But they're living in the dorms, they're taking part in football games and homecoming dances and whatever is going on campus. They are a part of that life. And the reason it is so normal is because these university students have been going to school with them their entire 12,
Um,
13 years of public education. And we just celebrated our 10th anniversary of that program. And I have colleagues who've done research on this program at our campus, and the success of the program, it's well beyond the success for these students in Build. It is the rest of the community does not see Bethel as Bethel if we didn't have Build.
oh,
And when I go to chapel, or if I go to Vespers on a Sunday night with all the students where there's, hundreds, even 1,000 or more students that show up, those students in Build are right there worshiping in the front row. And I know for a fact that is what heaven looks like, because God created them and they praise God just like anyone else, if not better, because they have no inhibitions. And that's what I want our classrooms to look like. That's what I want our communities to look like. And the micro school is no different.
mhm.
So having God's kingdom, having his children be represented in our world is what I want to see. And that's ultimately one of the deep core things that's bringing my husband and me away from America to try to make a difference in this and other places of the world.
So that concept right into the government structures to minister to those people. And then it's a way of living out, all of us are created in God's image, and letting them grow. I picture a garden full of all kinds of different flowers, different shapes,
Absolutely.
different aromas, different colors, and they're all there.
Mm-hmm.
They're all there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Katie. We've been talking with Dr. Katie Bonawitz of Bethel. She's also rock solid. That's a play on the word for Lithuania, Lithos. And we really appreciate your ministry, having tracked you over the years, and now what you're doing, stepping out on faith, going to be heading over to what that used to be called Eastern Europe, I suppose, up in the, what were those called? The Baltic
The
countries?
Baltics, the
Yeah,
Baltic countries.
yeah, yeah. So we're going to commit you in prayer to your ministry and what you do, and if you can continue to pray for us. And if we need a
Absolutely.
consultant sometime, I think I know who I can contact.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much.
Yes. Thank you, Bruce. A pleasure to be with you today.